Everybody, and welcome to Taylor Roots Junior In-House webinar. Thank you to everyone who's taken the time to join today. I'm going to try and drag this introduction out a little bit just to give everyone time to come in and make sure we all get all set up. We're hoping this gets off without too many technical hitches. We all seem to be ready to go, and as you should be able to see on the screen, I'm joined by a few panelists today. Some of you may know me. For those who don't, my name is Daggis. I am part of Taylor Roots in-house recruitment team, specifically on the financial services side myself. I'm going to be asking a series of questions to all of our panelists here today, who I will get on to introduce in just a moment. And it's all going to be about a career as an in-house lawyer. So we are joined by one of my colleagues, as well as three in-house lawyers who are going to be giving you their best advice and their experiences on working as an in-house lawyer, how you can forge a successful career, any kind of hints and all of what they've learned on their time on that path. So we hope that you're going to learn a lot, and hopefully whoever you are, whatever your situation is, you'll come out of this feeling more informed and a bit happier about all of that. So the idea, I imagine, is that most of you know what you're here for, you know what to expect, but I expect we're probably going to have quite a few junior in-house lawyers who have recently made the move, perhaps some who are in private practice who are thinking about making that move, maybe even some paralegals who are looking ahead a little bit further down the line at potentially taking that path at some point. But that's probably more than enough from me for the time being. So I'll get on to introducing my panelists. First of all, great pleasure to introduce Georgie Miller from my in-house team. So Georgie, welcome. Thanks for joining today. Why don't you tell everyone a bit about you and who you are?
Yeah, of course. So I joined Taylor Roots about a year ago, and I work on the commons and industry side of the market, specialising on the junior to mid-level, working across all sectors really, but with a specialism on media, tech and retail.
Lovely. And I will be asking you a few more questions as we go on about the recruitment market, specifically relating to in-house hires as well. So you've got all that to look forward to as well. As I mentioned earlier, we have three in-house superstar lawyers who have kindly given up their time today to join us, who it's my great pleasure to have on the webinar today. So thank you, all three of you, for taking the time to be a part of this. Really, really well appreciated, and looking forward to speaking to all of you. In no particular order, we have with us today Victoria Davis from Twitter, we have Kinar Wolf from Dentsu International, and we have Sam Lester from TD Securities. So let's start with you, Victoria. Welcome to the webinar. Thank you once again for your time. Could you just give us a bit of an introduction in terms of how and when and why you made the move in-house in the first place, and how that happened, and obviously just the story so far, taking us up to your current position in a nutshell?
Sure, thanks for having me. It's good to be here. So I went in-house on qualification, actually, more out of necessity, I suppose, than maybe choice, because I'd always wanted to do music. That was my focus. I trained at Harbottle & Lewis, which is obviously a media and entertainment firm, and sat in a number of different seats, but really wanted to focus on music. And as I came up to qualification, the music team at the time was kind of falling apart. So we had two partners, but both were leaving. And so it was in a bit of a state of flux. And so there wasn't a space there. There was a space in the corporate department, which I couldn't think of anything worse. So I started looking around, and thankfully something came up in Capital Radio, or GCAP Media, as it was called then. It's now Global Radio, so the biggest radio group in the UK. And I thought that's probably a better move for me. So I went in-house there. I was there for about 2 years, and then I got offered an opportunity at Ministry of Sound, which, for those of you who don't know, is a big media brand, so obviously big record label, so more into the music side that I'd wanted to get into. Obviously they've got the nightclub, but also big like brands that they license for all sorts of different things. And I was there for 6 years, grew the legal team, ended up also managing the sync and commercial team. And then I kind of felt I'd done everything that I could do at Ministry, and digital was really taking off. Again, I got offered an opportunity at SoundCloud, which is a music streaming service. And at the time we hadn't done any of the music licensing deals. We hadn't launched our ad products, and so that was me coming in to work on the legal stuff for that. launch our subscription program, sort the ad sales business out, and then go on to look after like business development and litigation and everything else basically. And now I've been at Twitter for, it'll be 5 years towards the end of the year. So I look after everything for the UK business. We're about 450 people in the UK, and I look after the legal function for everything for the UK, which involves commercial rights, policy, litigation, employment, etc. And I also run the global legal team for music. So yeah.
Fantastic. Kunal, do you think you can follow that? Because that was a strong introduction.
That's quite something to live up to. I will do my best. But yes, hello, and thanks again as also for having me as well. So my name's Kunal Worth. I am currently Deputy General Counsel at Dentsu in the UK and Ireland. I started off life in private practice as well at Simmons & Simmons, trained and qualified there. I'd always had an interest in technology. Technology has always been something, as a kid that I'd always loved. And I guess going into law, I was a bit like, well, where do I want to go? And I guess naturally kind of gravitated towards technology. So got a seat in a technology team at Simmons, loved it, and then qualified into that seat as well. And I was there, and I loved it. And it was all going really great. And I guess I kind of typical kind of in-house lawyer story in a sense. I went on secondment and realized what life was like in working in a business. And it's not so much what everyone says about the hours and all that kind of stuff. It was actually about, for me as a person, being closer to the business and understanding really what a business does. Not just being dropped into something at the last minute, really having that context behind a deal, almost being part of something right at the beginning, really, and being part of steering the ship. Rather than just being tossed into something and going, here you go, let's turn a draft. Yeah, it has to be all done before 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, kind of thing. And you're like, what on earth does this even mean? So, and as someone who loves technology as well, it meant that I got the opportunity to really work closely with engineering teams and sales teams to understand the products and services a lot more. And for me, I feel that makes me a better lawyer because one, I understand the business that you're working in, but two, also it's a sense of real intrigue and understanding about what you're doing. And I always remember a conversation I had with an engineer about something they were developing, and we were just talking about it, and he mentioned that there was open source software part of what he was doing, but he hadn't mentioned it to me previously. And obviously, for those of you who sort of have been involved in technology agreements, sort of having that angle in a license agreement completely changes the way that you go to market with the agreement. So anyway, so I decided that from that moment onwards that in-house was for me. And so I spent a couple more years at Simmons, kind of doing the classic kind of getting a bit more experience and, getting in order what I really wanted to do. Started to look around for in-house roles, saw a role at Apple that come up, and thought this was sort of the pinnacle of technology companies, and applied for a role there and was successful in getting a role supporting their iPhone and iPad team. So I was there for a couple of years, really enjoyed it, great trips out to California and, all the kind of glam stuff working with products and the brand. I moved on from there to take a role at HP, supporting their enterprise services business in what they described as a mini general counsel role. And it really was, I was sort of supporting one of their big accounts, did a full range of work and really kind of cut my teeth, I guess, as a sort of more general commercial lawyer, kind of working across not just sort of the client contracting piece, but, the suppliers, dealing with employment issues, real estate issues, litigation. And then I moved on from there to Dentsu, which is where I am now. Started off life as a senior legal counsel in the north. I've moved from London to Yorkshire during that time. And, and I built a legal team in the north business. And then was promoted up to Deputy General Counsel at the end of 2020, and now look after, with it together, General Counsel, sort of the legal team at Dentsu in the UK.
Fantastic. Well, you had me sold at the trips to California. So all sounds very exciting. Thank you very much for that. And last but no means least, of course, Sam Lester. Sam, welcome to the webinar. Thank you for joining. Can you give us a bit of a summary of your story so far and how you made the move in-house?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me, Takis. And yeah, great intro. I'm thinking about how I can get Superstar in-house counsel added to my business cards, but I'm not even sure over lockdown that they're still creating them. But yeah, I'll have to put that one down. That's great. Yeah. So hi everyone. I'm Sam Lester, European Counsel for TD Securities, which is the investment banking arm of the Toronto Dominion Bank. TD quite small in Europe, but you look across the Atlantic and it's actually the second biggest bank in Canada, and it's a top 10 bank by retail component in terms of the US. So yeah, pretty sizable operations in North America. I joined TD in the height of lockdown around 2 years ago. Prior to that, I've spent my career in what we call sell-side financial institutions, so banks. I was at Credit Suisse in London for some time as director, heading up what we called financial advisory legal, so a mixture of corporate transactional work, reg change, big project stuff. And before that, I was at Jefferies, which is a US investment bank, where I was part of the IBD EMEA legal team, so full sort of product suite of coverage, and very similar to Kunal. And I'm sure we'll start to see some emerging themes through our perspectives. But I went to Jefferies as a secondee from my law firm. Thought I'd spend 6 months there and then return to 3am finishes as a general corporate transactional lawyer, and then best laid plans. I decided that I loved it so much that I was going to stick around for a while. So yeah, I trained and qualified at a mid-sized city firm as a corporate finance M&A lawyer, and yeah, I remember vividly within 24 hours of being at the bank as a secondee, just thinking this is much more my bag. The cut and thrust of it, the velocity of it, just everything about it I loved, and I never looked back. The rest is history. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
There we go. Fantastic. Yeah, I can imagine there's at least 1 or 2 people watching that can relate to some of those late finishes, certainly. So yeah, thanks for that intro, and thank you all. Great start. So one thing I just want to mention to everyone listening, I should have started this a second ago, and I'm just going to do it now. We have got a poll that we'd like to run, and I've just launched this now. So you should now be able to vote on when you would say is the optimum, perfect, ideal time to make the move in-house as a qualified lawyer. So we've put a few options in. We've got NQ to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5. Just be curious to see what you will come up with, and it will factor into the questions. We're going to come on to that in just a moment as well. On a similar note, you can also send in questions for the panel. So if you get the chance, please think about anything that you'd like the panelists to answer. And assuming we have some time at the end and it hasn't all been covered by then, which hopefully we'll have a few left over and a few points to get onto, we will ask a few questions when we get to it at the end. So have a think if there's anything you'd like to ask, and we'll try and put that on at the end. But before we get onto that, back to a few more questions. I'm going to come back to you again quickly, just because you obviously spent a little bit of time in private practice before moving in-house, and you've touched on some of this already. So I just wanted to get a bit of a summary of what you would say are the main differences between working in a law firm and working in-house. If you had to summarize it as key points, what would you say are the main things that separate the two jobs?
Yeah, and I think, as you say, I mentioned it earlier when I was sort of talking about my career, and it's to me, it's the most important point, really, just really being part of a business and really having that better understanding of what the business drivers, having a better understanding of the products and services, how they work, how they deliver, how they're being sold. And I think having that really depth of understanding is sort of, for a lot of people, I think really helps them, tailor the legal product, I guess, helps them become a better lawyer. And I think also the other piece that I sort of mentioned earlier is all around that kind of being at the start of the process, being really there to help steer the ship. And for me, there's a real sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in part of that, being there from day one, understanding and really kind of driving things forwards, and your role becomes less legal, in a way as well, because you're kind of there talking about the strategy, you're thinking and hearing the conversations, around how something's coming about. And if you are, and inevitably, it's not a straightforward process, as I'm sure most in-house lawyers will say, that, sometimes you do have to work all hours, a bit like private practice. It's obviously clearly a bit more rarer, depending on the profession and the business. But for me, it helped understand, it helps if you understand why. If you're getting to that point, you could almost steer the ship away from that point. Or alternatively, if you're having to do that, at least you know why you're doing it. You understand why you're putting part of that. And at the end, when something's signed or something's done, there's a real greater sense of satisfaction that you've really seen it through from the beginning all the way through to the end. And you've really got that sense of fulfillment about something. So for me, that's kind of the biggest differences between private practice and in-house.
Can I just add, Kunal, I completely agree with all of that. And I think, if there's one thing that I'd love to get across in the next hour or so is just, and if anyone has any questions in terms of just certain myths and misnomers and presumptions I had about in-house versus private practice, one of them being the hours, particularly when you go to a big bank and you hear all the sort of horror stories. I was also coming back from, as I said, corporate, which had long hours. I can honestly say with full transparency, and I'd be really interested in Victoria and Kunal's views. I've never worked harder than I do now in my role, but it's a completely different way of working. And that doesn't mean that I'm chained to a desk or I'm on the end of my phone till all hours at night. But I just think that it's really important to get across that you will work hard, no doubt, but it's a very different way of working and not necessarily working harder, but working smarter.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I think the thing there is that it's your company, whereas when you're in private practice, you're working for all these other companies that you don't have potentially a vested interest in. And when you're in-house, it's your baby as well. I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Feel a bit more connected to the company. Yeah, I understand. One thing that none of you mentioned, actually, I'm sure many people listening will be interested to hear about is the salary difference, which is obviously an important factor. Georgie, I'd like to get your input now, if that's okay, just in terms of what we've seen in terms of salaries at the more junior end of the market, specifically in private practice hires versus in-house hires, and what sort of salaries an in-house lawyer can expect.
Yeah, of course. So I think anyone sort of looking at the legal market at the moment will see that there's been a big increase in the private practice salaries. And that's definitely starting to filter through to the in-house market as well. There's sort of been driven by two things. One is the rise in the private practice salaries, and the other is the growth of what we call the FANG brands, which are Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google. That's not to say that you'll be matching private practice salaries, and there's definitely a range depending on the industry that you go into. So we often see that clients in the media and retail space and big brands often struggle to keep up with the salaries with the tech companies and the banks. But I think one of the most important things to consider with in-house is it's much more about the general package rather than your base salary. So in-house salaries are boosted through a range of different measures. For example, car allowance, which is a bit misleading because it actually has nothing to do with cars. It's just a cash add-on to your base salary, which is paid out annually, or a position allowance, which is a similar thing. And it's much easier to meet the bonuses as well in-house. So, and I think you're also getting the work-life balance piece as well. So that's definitely things to consider when you're looking at an in-house salary.
Exactly. Once you work it out on an hourly rate basis, it becomes a slightly different proposition, doesn't it? But we won't talk too much about that. We don't want to upset our friends in the private practice team. So moving along, Victoria, I'd like to ask you, and your answer may echo some of what we've already had from some of the other answers, I guess. There's a lot of overlap in this, but what would you say is the thing you enjoyed the most about your time as an in-house lawyer?
Yeah, I mean, I think to echo what Kunal said before, the biggest thing is getting close to the business and kind of understanding what makes it tick and building those relationships with people day in, day out that you might not necessarily get as much with private practice when you have a much kind of more limited exposure to them. But yeah, the biggest thing is really getting in from the beginning. So, being part of the team that works out how to do something. And a lot of that is not even legal. When I was at SoundCloud, we were starting to map out what the what the deals were going to look like. A lot of that was not a legal conversation. It was a commercial conversation, and so being involved in that has been fabulous. Like for me anyway, really enjoyed that. And being able to take a bit more risks. I kind of feel like when you're in private practice, you have to set out exactly what the law is. Whereas in-house, you are much more of a assessing risk on a constant basis, working out, well, okay, yes, that might not be strictly legal or whatever, but what's the risk? Are we willing to take it because there's other things that we need to consider? Obviously, when at Twitter we do that all the time, when there's governments potentially around the world saying, this is illegal, but we are trying to protect a user's voice and we won't give user data or we won't do certain things. And, that is something that is a risk analysis rather than a legal analysis.
Brilliant. I mean, that's kind of leading in somewhat to my next question, actually. And Sam, I'd like to ask you, this has all been very positive so far, and you're giving a great account of life as an in-house lawyer, and it all sounds wonderful, but we want to try and provide something of a balanced view and not send a message that it's all sunshine and rainbows 24/7. What would you say are the biggest challenges that you found, particularly when you first started working in-house, that perhaps people might not expect?
Yeah, sure. And again, I'm not trying to put a positive spin on challenges, but
Challenge
I
is
think
not necessarily a bad thing after all.
yeah, I think it really depends on your
Right.
mindset.
Yeah.
I think we couldn't say with a straight face that in-house is for everyone, but if you have the right personality, a lot of the challenges are really exciting things that I always welcomed with open arms. I think also important to say, and again, no spin, I think certainly when I left private practice, or when I was going on secondment, my supervisor said to me, I think it's a good idea for you to do a secondment, even if you don't think it's for you, and I think probably now even more, even if you've got your heart set on staying in private practice partnership, I think my advice, in terms of lawyers that I work with, I would always welcome and expect someone to have done a secondment or secondments during their career. I just think it generally makes you a better lawyer, and I just think there's some things you just can't appreciate or learn from 3 steps removed, at your law firm. But I mean, saying all of that, and again, spin aside, I think the biggest challenge is probably just knowing, depending on how well you land on your feet, and I think I've been really lucky in terms of the institutions that I've worked at, that you've just got that freedom, sort of following on from what Victoria said, to sort of just make your career exactly what you want it to be. You go from a place which, in quite a lot of institutions, I think at least, from when I left, it was very sort of boxed in, very, lockstep in terms of your progression. And if I stay, if I grind away and put in so many billable hours in a year, I'm going to get to associate, and then to senior associate, and then to managing partner, and salaried partner or whatever. And you go from a place which is very, as I said, labor intensive, process driven, monotonous, set paths, to just having all sorts of opportunities at your feet, and not feeling like you're a hired hand anymore, or 3 steps removed from the action. And that can be, based on your personality, that can initially be sort of a scary place to be. Again, I've had the pleasure of working in institutions where there's no clear blue water between what we do and what necessarily the business and other stakeholders do. There's allocation of responsibility and guardrails and playbooks, but it is very much, you are a partner at the table, and your voice is going to be heard, and they're going to ask your opinion on things. So having a seat at the table at an early stage, depending on your approach to things, can be daunting, but I've always really enjoyed that, and I've learned very quickly in the process. I think occupational hazard as well, of going from a place where you're at the beck and call to your supervisors and partners in law firms, and suddenly having all and sundry jump over themselves to try and help you, can be sort of a strange sort of acclimatization. But and that's it, tongue firmly in cheek. But I think also that's another point that I'd stress. It can be overwhelming when you start in-house as a junior. But I think one thing I always sort of underestimated, and there's always sort of been an anchoring point to me, is just how helpful people have been, both in terms of my team at the bank, but also mentors, partners, people that I've grown up with, in external law firms, who I qualified with, who are now partners, who are so willing to put the time in to go the extra mile to really frankly make me appear much more smart and clued up than I actually am. And so I think there are lots of challenges, but I always see those challenges as opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's the point we're trying to make, is it's not necessarily for everyone, and it's obviously something people need to give the required amount of thought to. And I think that's probably part of the reason why people are sometimes reluctant to maybe make the move before they are a certain level of lawyer. And that's obviously something we wanted to touch on. And I mentioned earlier, we have this poll that we've been running, and I just want to reveal the results of this poll, and it's quite not quite unanimous, but quite an overwhelming majority have said that the optimum time to move in house is around the 2 to 3 years PQE mark, which is an interesting one. Not surprising. I would have guessed that's probably around the level most people would say. But Kuno, I want to get your opinion on this, because I know we talked about this before, but do you think there is an ideal time to move in house? Does it depend on the individual, and why would you say it is or isn't?
Yeah, unfortunately, I probably fall very much within the bucket of the poll. Actually.
Yeah, that is your rate.
Yeah. About 2 years PQE as well. And I moved with that kind of, I guess, that belief in mind that I did my training contract, get a couple of years under my belt in private practice, get some good experience, and then move on. I think now in hindsight, and actually I've done a lot of recruitment in my team over the past few years. And we've recruited at all different levels. We've recruited at 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, even newly qualified. And I think that is quite indicative, I guess, of the fact that I think the market's probably changed and the organisation's changed. And I think it is down to the individual ultimately about how confident you are. There's no doubt that moving in-house, there is less supervision, there is less kind of hand-holding that there is in private practice. That's just a given with the way that in-house works. We don't have the same size of teams and the same structures in place to kind of give you that support. But depending on the size of the in-house team that you join, there can be a good level of support. And if you can go and join one, a one-person team, and then it's you and that person, then it could be quite tricky. But depending on sort of what the workload is. Likewise, I work in a team now of about 14 lawyers, and we've got a good amount of senior lawyers to support junior lawyers within the team. So, in terms of, when you're toying up with the idea and thinking, well, should I stick around for a couple of years, and is 4 years the right point? And I don't think so. I think it's whenever you feel ready as a person that you would like to make that move, and you can be ready, like Victoria said, at sort of that newly qualified, qualification stage. You think, actually, and we recruited a couple of people who knew literally during their training contracts it was not for them. That private practice was not for them. They wanted to go straight into in-house, and we've recruited people who've stuck around for a few years and then gone, yeah, no, what I've done my time, and I quite like the in-house kind of route and what it offers me, and so I'm going to do that instead. So I can't provide a definitive answer. I think it's just down to the individual. But what I would say is that when you are deciding, really consider the type of organisation of the business and the size of the team you're going into, and ask the right questions around the kind of level of support that you feel that you might need, or how that sort of team is set up to provide.
Perfect. No, I mean, I'm glad that you say you can't provide a definitive answer, because I think the point we're trying to get across is that maybe there is no definitive answer, and it is dependent on who you are and what team you join. And it's interesting you mentioned that you're seeing, or you have had hires on the more junior end, even NQ hires, because it's something that we've started to see a little bit more of, isn't it, Georgie? We've started to see a little bit more of a shift in the market towards in-house teams in particular, hiring people right from NQ upwards.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that actually within my team, over half of our hires are at the junior level across all of the different industries. Even at the moment, I'm working on 3 or 4 roles which are at the NQ to 2 level. And I think, as Kunal says, it's really about judging when you feel is the right time for you to move in-house. And for some people that will be that they'll see a dream job come up in a company they've always wanted to work in, and others they'll do a secondment and realise it's time. But it's just about seeing how you feel and where you want your career to go.
Exactly. So basically, long story short, there is no correct answer, but thanks for taking part in the poll anyway. We would definitely appreciate that. And it's always interesting to see the results of those. Just get back to the questions then. This kind of actually, this carries on quite nicely from that one. I want to ask you, Victoria, to give your thoughts on this. What would you say is the type of company you should be looking for if you are at the more junior end? Obviously, you've worked in a few different types of companies broadly in the same sort of sets, but not necessarily in terms of sector, but in terms of the team and the setup. What should you look for as a junior lawyer? Let's say maybe in the NQ to 2 bracket. If you're making that move in-house, what kind of things should you be on the lookout for?
Yeah, I think it would be good to go somewhere where you're going to get a broad remit of work, so not kind of just doing the same contracts day in, day out, because I think you are still junior. The best thing you can do is learn. You don't know necessarily where you want to go, and so getting exposure to some commercial, some like litigate, or different types of deals and different business people as well, I think would be really, really beneficial. And also, I mean, Kunal touched on it earlier, but like the size of the team, I wouldn't suggest going into somewhere where there's where the company's really tiny and there's only like 5 people or something and you're the only lawyer. It'd be better, I think, to start with to have a few more senior people around who would be able to guide you in different respects, and a business that does maybe different things where you can get experience in different areas, which you could then take somewhere else, and it might not be the same company at all, but you've learned those skills. So I think that's probably the most important thing.
It's interesting you should say that it's good to look at something with a broad scope of work. Obviously, you don't want to pigeonhole yourself too early on in your career, but one thing that's interesting that I've noticed, I'm sure Georgie would have seen the same thing, is that the NQ, 1 PQE, 2 PQE roles, no matter what sector it is, no matter what the business is, the job descriptions are often very similar. So I find myself being able to put the same person forward for jobs at very different businesses because people are making those jobs available to you, where you can actually keep a really broad skill set and not necessarily marry yourself to one particular area of law, which is obviously encouraging for anyone looking to make that move. So
I think I'd also say that I think it can sometimes get overlooked because in private practice, the career progression route is so set in stone. Yeah. But I think there are really good ways that you can boost your in-house career as well. For example, through data protection courses or IP courses, and a lot of our clients actually support people in doing that. So it can really help you, even if you do go into a broad role, you can still develop niche specialisms within that and continue to grow your legal skills.
Exactly, definitely. So we've decided to move in-house. We found the perfect company, the perfect team. You've got your foot in the door, you've got that job. Sam, how do you then make your way through the ranks? What kind of path is available to a junior lawyer in-house, typically speaking, from the minute you get the first job? How does that progression look once you get up, all the way up to, say, general counsel? What's the typical kind of path that you'd be looking to aim down?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think, I mean, in the institutions that I've worked in, I think I see some similarities, across the piece. I think one really interesting dynamic is that in private practice, it tends to be the more senior you get, the more specialized you get, and that sort of, pyramid in terms of your knowledge base. Whereas for me, I started relatively specialized within financial services, right? And then over my career, I've just found the breadth of my knowledge, really becoming that sort of jack of all trades, sort of central repository in terms of knowing about all sorts of bits and pieces. So I think in terms of that progression, I think it really depends on the institution. As I say, having worked at a handful of institutions in my career, I think I can honestly say, and this isn't to say that it doesn't happen in private practice, but I think that for the best in-house teams, and institutions in general, they really invest in people as opposed to roles. Particularly with TD, one thing that you see a lot of institutions pay a lot of lip service to is sort of that, internal mobility, career mobility. And TD really actually puts its money where its mouth is there in terms of, you see lawyers going from the team in North America, in the US, to Canada, to London, and you see people going from an operational function to a risk function to a front office function, some sort of risk and controls function. It's all very fluid, and they want to retain people, and they also know that people, they may not end up having the same career goals, in a year's time, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, and they want people that know the business, that are good people, that are committed, and they will really bend over backwards to sort of meet you as to what you want to be doing and where you want to be doing it. So, I think coming back to a point that Victoria made, I think it's really important and key, and I think it's not a science, it's an art form. I think really important to ask those tough questions at the outset, or if you don't feel comfortable asking those questions of your employer intent or would be employer in terms of career trajectory, make sure that you have Takis and the other bad cops at Taylor Root asking those questions for you, because it is really important, and it can separate sort of those immature teams from folks that have really been there and done it. But I find now, particularly at TD, succession planning, as I said, is really important. Teams want people to do well. It's in everyone's interest. The best leaders, they just continually will promote their team and make it look like the team did all of the hard work. And I think that's key. I think there's a variety of paths again, and that's something I've always really liked about in-house. I don't ever see it. Some people really like the idea that if I work, or I bill enough X hours, or I do enough late nights, or I hang around and scramble for enough years, I'll make partnership. Without really thinking about sort of what you have to sacrifice in the meantime. For me, it was much more of a less linear but exciting path that also moves with industry and change as well.
Fantastic. Well, that's what to do once you're in the door. Let's talk about getting in the door in the first place. Let's talk about interviews. Kunal, I'm going to take it back to you now. You've interviewed both types of organization in your time, and you have been involved on the other side of the table as well. You've interviewed people. What would you say are the main differences, if there are any, between interviews at law firms and interviews for in-house teams generally?
Yeah, I mean, I can only talk from sort of personal experience around and as a sort of, we've recruited quite a lot of people in the past couple of years or so, and typically what we look for in sort of in-house interviews tends to be around, I guess, sort of getting really a flavour of who a person is, like what their appetite for really kind of learning is. People change industries or they change businesses, and there's always a bit of a learning curve there. And it's really about getting a feel for the person of like, have they really got the hunger and the appetite to really get stuck into things that they have no idea what on earth's going on. And, everything's a bit of a blur, but they just want to get stuck in and really get that real kind of passion for driving things forward. So I think, that's a really key kind of thing for me when I'm interviewing people that I look for. Another thing which we sort of like to look at is, I guess, and it's the horrible sort of cliche term about being commercial, and that have pragmatic view about the world. And this is, I guess, the difference a little bit between private practice and in-house, in the sense that, and I think it's something that Victoria sort of touched upon earlier, is around, when you are providing advice to the business, it's more of a yes or no, or if it's a no, how can we do it instead, kind of solution sort of based advice, rather than here's a big analysis, and at the end, we're not really telling you what to do. It's up to you, Mr. Client, as to what you do. And that's kind of how private practice is sort of set up, and we understand all the reasons for that. But, when you go in-house, you are expected to give a view about things. You are expected, in some cases, to make decisions about things. And when you're interviewing candidates, what you're really trying to get a feel of is how competent that person is at doing that. Have they got the confidence to do that? And what's their own sort of risk appetite, or what would be the approach they would take to certain situations, to really get a feel of, does that person really truly understand how to really, to navigate those situations? So yeah, I mean, those are the two kind of big things for me. I mean, there's lots of other bits and pieces, but I would guess they're quite similar to private practice in terms of the person and their CV, and you talk about their experience, etc. But for me, those are the two sort of key differentiators between in-house and private practice interviews.
Yeah, I mean, a good interview is a good interview at the end.
Sorry, Takis, can Can I
Go
just
ahead.
add as well, just in terms of dispelling misnomers, feel like I've got to do it. I think also just having recruited over my career quite a lot, people will always say, what's more important, sort of, technicals, academics, or the soft skills. And if I can get technicals, that's fantastic. But it's certainly not a prerequisite. And my questions completely agree with Kunal, much around the softer stuff. How you approach situations. I think if you don't have someone with the right attitude that's going to roll their sleeves up, get involved, be a team player, but also happy to work, with supervision, but also to take ownership of things. That's much more of a gating item than the technical. So I just wanted to get across, and maybe it'll go into some of the later questions that if anyone on the call is thinking that they need an insight for my line of work, an encyclopedic knowledge of FSMA, you're wrong.
I think it's almost given, isn't it? The technicals, it's almost like we've really looked at your CV. You can do that already. Not there to sort of gauge whether or not your ins and outs about liability clauses. It's around, as Sam said, about all the other stuff. So I totally agree there.
Yeah, it's what you can mold them into rather than the ready-made knowledge that they have, I suppose, and the potential. Victoria, what do you look for when you're interviewing people? Because obviously you've been involved in your fair share of hiring, and it's difficult to know from an hour-long conversation with somebody, but what makes somebody stand out for you as an in-house candidate or a good in-house candidate when you're interviewing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is really, are they going to get on with the team? Are they going to be able to get the buy-in from the business? Because the last thing you want in a company is legal being this in an ivory tower. Everyone's like, oh, legal, doesn't want to talk to you. What you want is for this person to be able to build rapport with their clients, be totally at ease with them, so that they want to come and talk to you, and they actually want you to be involved from an early thing, because again, going back to it, because they want your opinion, because they know you're going to help rather than hinder. So that's really important. Like if someone's not, and might not even the person, if they're just not going to gel with the team that they're going to have to work with, then it's potentially just going to be a bit of a disaster. So that really important. I think, again, to follow on from some of the things we've talked about, the ability to be comfortable in uncomfortable situations, in change, to be able to, because things change all the time in-house. I don't think it matters what business, but to be able to pivot, to go, okay, I've been working on this, but now, whoa, everything's changed. That's okay. I can put my mind to that as well and not get offended by it. And also someone who can, write clear advice in a succinct way, which normal people understand in an email and not a 4-page memo, because nobody is going to read it.
English, not legalese. Yeah, absolutely. That's probably echoed by a lot of people. Thanks for that. Georgie, what would you add to that? Because obviously, you've got a slightly different perspective on what makes a good candidate for an in-house role. What do you look for when you're speaking to people? And what is the feedback from your clients in terms of what they like to see and what makes somebody stand out?
Yes, I would definitely reiterate Victoria's point that one of the key things that our clients look for are people who can integrate well with the business and basically explain legal to non-lawyers. But I think one of the key things is people who can show a real interest in the company and the sector. I think there's probably, most people would agree, a big difference between working for a private practice company and in-house you're part of the brand. And I think hiring managers are often looking for people who are really passionate about the brand and the sector, whether that you can demonstrate that through any way, really, through a comment or your outside interests. But they really want people who've researched the company, understand the team, and basically who are well prepared for that interview.
Yeah, and what I would add as well, just touching on what Victoria mentioned earlier with someone who would get on well with the business, nearly every process I've worked on in recent times for this sort of position, an interview with the business is nearly always included, and it's always important to make sure that you can show that commercial side and show you're someone who will get on with them and be a good point of contact there. Sam, take it back to you. I asked you earlier about challenges moving in-house, and obviously, I'm not singling you out to give you the hard questions. I'm not trying to get you to bash the in-house career here, but what would you say to somebody to counteract all of that? If someone said they were a bit nervous about it, they weren't sure, they had the reservations, just generally, what would you say to someone who was a bit nervous about making that move early on in their career?
Yeah, look, I think that's a spot on question. My honest advice, as someone that can overthink things a bit, and I think we all have that capability, right, as risk averse lawyers and control functions, is absolutely try it. Even in a limited capacity, whether that's and this is going to shock you in terms of my bias as a secondee, you can come talk to me, or as a contractor, as far as I can see, in my experience, you've got nothing to lose. Worst case scenario, find out it's not for you. Newsflash, you've just made yourself 10% more lucrative to a private practice law firm when you go back. Even if it doesn't work out, I have said this to secondees, and my supervisor said this to me when I was originally on secondment at Jefferies and thought I was just going to go back to my law firm. You will find that your skills and your perspective are just going to skyrocket over your peers. You're going to, even if you do a secondment, you're going to go back to your law firm and you're going to be running rings around them, just in terms of how you appreciate issues, how you deal with issues, how you just, you'll still deal with the small stuff, but you won't sweat it in the same way. You'll be able to see the wood for the trees in terms of what's the client thinking, and again, working with a cross section of law firms. You see law firms that do it really well and see law firms that don't, and those law firms that really do it well, you can tell that they have that intricate knowledge of clients. They've been at the client, because they're coming to me with advice, and they're not just saying, as Kunal said or Victoria said, this is your memo. It could be A, it could be B, over to you. It's like, well, actually, I know TD, I know Sam, we've worked together a bunch of times, I know exactly where your pressure point's going to be. And I think I'm going to advise you, actually, you're going to want to do B. And if you, want to do A, that's fine. We can talk about it, and discuss it. But, I would encourage everyone on this call, if you're in private practice or if you're not in a law firm yet or whatever, seek out opportunities, talk to people. The more I found out about opportunities, the more comfortable I was. It's a two-way process in terms of interviews. I think a lot of people forget that. You are interviewing them, as well as us interviewing you, and I think it all makes you more informed. So and I think also important, to just stress, as I said, a big misnomer, and I've been lucky, never Taylor Root, but there have been other recruiters over the years that have said to me, if you go in-house, you're never going back, the door's shut to you in private practice. Absolute rubbish at every level. I've seen juniors go back to private practice, back to in-house. I've seen juniors I've seen seniors in-house being made partner, then go back to the bank for a bit. One informs the other. So I think that flexibility should really be underlined in this webinar.
Absolutely. In fact, you've more or less taken the words out of my mouth there, Sam. I was just going to get on to say that it is worth keeping in mind that it doesn't close with that door, and you can always go back. The truth is, in my experience, most people, once they've gone in-house, they tend to stay there. But I would say that, wouldn't I? But Victoria, just out of interest, a bit of a subjective one, but would you ever consider making a move back to private practice? You can say no, but what's the point? Do you think it's possible? Is it something that you think is a reasonable thing on the cards for someone to do? Is it quite easy to take that step back if they wanted to?
I think it's as Sam said, I know people from junior to senior that have gone back in, so I think it's absolutely open to you. I'm not sure I would, but again, you never know. Maybe I think it would have to. It has to be a certain kind of firm that was willing to do things maybe a slightly bit differently, but that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, I suppose it's subjective, isn't it? It depends on your own personal motivations. If you want to tick the partner box, for example, you get to that level and it's something you always wanted to do, it's always open. So I suppose that's something to think about, and you're not necessarily going to close the door on that forever. So for you risk-averse lawyers out there, you've always got your options open. I'm conscious of time. We do have about 10 minutes left at the moment. There's one more question I wanted to throw at all of you, just to get your kind of closing summary, I suppose. Before I do, I just wanted to turn to Georgie one last time and just ask to give a bit of an overview of what the typical in-house recruitment process looks like from start to finish. I know I've touched on it a bit myself, but what would you say is the typical process for an in-house hire?
Yes, obviously with the pandemic, it's gone through a lot of change. So pre-pandemic, most interviews would have been in person. Obviously, there was then the transition to fully remote, which I think brings with it a load of benefits and challenges. Obviously, the benefit is that you can move it quickly, but the challenges are that it's much more difficult to present yourself and relate to someone over video, and you don't get to meet the stakeholders, and I don't think you get as good a feel for the business, which I think is why we've now seen the transition to a sort of hybrid model where you will often do the first stages virtually to keep you sort of engaged with the process and understand whether or not it's for you. I think it's important to consider that a first stage interview is as much for the candidate as it is for the client. If you go and you don't think it's for you, it does happen. And then you'll often have in-person meetings with the team and the stakeholders, and it really gives you a good feel for the business. Generally, I think we see processes be about 2 to 3 stages at the moment, but that really does vary. Some of the tech companies, for example, have longer processes, sort of 6 or 7. I can see Victoria smiling.
Or 11 or 12.
Yeah. Well, we do try and narrow it down, but there's a lot to get in. And I think often there'll also be a technical element at the junior level as well, whether that is a technical test or you ask them technical questions. But again, the more you sort of prepare for the interview, the better equipped you'll be for those questions, and definitely talk to your recruiters about it, because they'll be able to help you prepare for technical competency-based questions as well.
Fantastic, thank you. I have a challenge for the other 3 of you. Because we are slightly short on time, I would like, if possible, a slightly abridged version of the next question, just so we can leave a little bit of time to take a couple of questions from the attendees. What I'd like you to do is try and summarize in maybe a kind of number 1 top tip or a top 3 of just your best advice to somebody making the move in-house, someone who's starting a new career as an in-house lawyer. I'll start with you, Kunal, because I feel like I've not asked you a question in a while. What's your number 1 tip for someone who's just made the move in-house?
Ask questions. Ask lots and lots and lots of questions. There's nothing stupid. There's no silly questions that you can ask. Like, I think when you go into a business and you are trying to understand what on earth is going on, what the products or services are, how things are sold, where things are, who does what, there is so much to get to grips with. And if you don't ask questions, you will find very quickly that you become well out of your depth and just have no idea. So, and I think, you know, in all the in-house roles I've been in, you know, it's always been a great culture of people being able to ask as many questions as they want. And even now, you know, I still have tons of questions, and I will still happily ask them, because I walk into a room and I'm like, I have no idea what's going on here. I will still ask the questions now. So yeah,
right.
Biggest tip to ask questions.
Sam, has Kunal just taken your answer, or have you got another top tip for us?
No, it's spot on. Like, the longer I go on in this gig, the more questions that I'm asking, and I think the more basic questions that I'm asking, you know, and the more comfortable I feel. So that's spot on. But no, I was going to say, just, you know, as I said before, I think my real best advice is, you know, even if you've got a hunch that it might be something you're interested in, just go for it. Just go for it. You know, it might be the best decision you ever made. And, you know, I'm very biased, but I do think the cutting edge of what we do and the best lawyers are in-house, and we need much more of us. You know, the job's going to change, but there'll always be, you know, roles for people that, you know, really smart commercial people that want to provide value. So my advice is just go for it. There's always, you know, private practice grind will always be there to go back to. You never know.
Brilliant. Thanks for that. We'll just go for it. So, Victoria, before we turn over to a couple of questions from the audience, what's your top tip for moving in-house?
I'd say, I mean, it's kind of linked, but go and talk to the business, and that's everybody, like not just the legal, not just the teams you work with, literally go and talk to every part of that business and try and understand as much as you can about that business. Because even if you don't touch on it immediately, you might touch on it in another way, or it just gives you knowledge that you can identify other issues because you know what's going on somewhere else, and if you know, and you can take it with you. So talk to everybody. Yeah,
Fantastic. Thank you all very much for that. Great advice, needless to say. We are on a bit of a race against the clock here. I'm not 100% sure what happens when the clock strikes 3, but we'll try and get as many questions from the audience as we can in for now. I've got one here that I'd like to ask just generally to the group, so feel free to jump in if you've got anything to mention on this point. The question reads, as a junior currently working in-house and reaching qualification soon, I am much more interested in staying in-house upon qualification. Do you think that not getting any private practice experience could be a detriment to a legal career? It's a great question. Any takers for that one? Obviously, you're all shaking your heads very, very slightly.
I can say something really quickly just because I know we're pressed for time, but no, I don't think so. As I said, in terms of the priority of what makes for me a really effective team member, it's certainly not the technicals over the soft skills. And also, like, another misnomer, it's not like you go in-house and then your relationship with private practice and your relationship with the law and your relationship with learning ends. Far from it. If anything, it's the complete opposite. So that those resources are always open to you, and you'll continue to learn and interact with law firms. If anything, you'll be exposed, in my experience, to a much wider range of lawyers in your career as an in-house counsel.
Fantastic. Just another question here, actually, that is perhaps slightly tied in with some of your advice from just now, but how have you handled areas of law that you're unfamiliar with whilst in-house, which I expect happens on a daily basis when there is limited budget for instructing an external law firm? So if someone comes up to you and they ask you something that you've never heard of before, what's your reaction?
I can take this one because it's like my life. I mean, I think originally you've got to look into it. So I think you have to use common sense a lot of the time. Sometimes that will actually just get you wherever. I mean, if it's really technical, I think you do have to go to outside counsel for some of it. And I think if people are saying there's no budget, I think you have to go back to your in-house team and say, look, we can do so much in-house, but there's some things we've got to get somebody else to come in and do. And that can be a learning experience for you. And then next time when they come and ask you, you don't need to go to outside counsel. So you kind of have to, you have to see it like that. So I think it's using common sense, not being scared, researching it, getting someone else to research it if you can, and asking outside counsel when it is like a specific area that you need specialist advice on.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's almost just about taking us up to about as much as we can squeeze into this hour-long session. So there were some more questions. I'm so sorry I wasn't able to get to everyone's questions. In truth, quite a few of them have probably been answered in one way or another by all the other questions. So sorry for not reading everything out. But for one last time, thank you all 4 of you panelists for being with us today and for your time. Really appreciate it. I hope everyone who's been watching has learned a lot and found this useful. And I'm sure many of you are already thinking about making a move in-house, but please do get in touch with Georgie or me on the financial services side, Georgie on the commercial side. If you are interested, have any questions and would like to learn any more, you can get in touch via our website or of course on LinkedIn, and look out on LinkedIn for some more marketing material around this webinar. We'll be up on LinkedIn on a video before too long, I'm sure. So yeah, thank you all very much. Best of luck with your careers, and sure we'll do another one of these soon.
Thanks for having us, Takis.
No worries.
Yeah,
Take care.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.